Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Gaventa. I'm the coordinator of the Collaborative on Faith and Disability, and we're delighted to welcome you to the first of the spring 2019 webinar series. Today, our first webinar is on Islam and disability in theory and in practice. Forward, Eric. We have two guests with us today. Suheil, Dr. Suheil is the academic director of Fawakih, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I have gotten to know him because he has been to two of our summer institutes on theology and disability, and has made presentations there. He is both an imam and a Ph.D. and a father of a son with a disability. And Joohi Tahir is the executive director and co-founder of MUHSEN, the Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs. The collaborative, just briefly, is, you'll see the mission there on the slide in front of you. I don't need to read all of that, but our hope is that we can provide people with disabilities, families, those who support them in all kinds of disciplines and in all kinds of community organizations, not just faith communities, can find ways to support them in ways that help people to become more fully members in our communities and valued members. Our collaborative partners in the collaborative right now are other university centers of excellence in developmental disabilities, all connected through the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. And forward. And the webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the Collaborative on Faith and Disability website, as are the webinars from the series we have done in the past. There'll be the PowerPoint and mentioned resources and helpful links will be there along with the webinar recording. During this webinar, you can submit questions in the chat box for discussion after the presentations, and I will read some of the posted questions to the presenters during the questions and answers, and phone lines will be silenced. Forward, Eric. Our time is brief. We're asking each of the presenters to present for about 20 minutes, and then we'll share with you some information on upcoming webinars and the collaborative after the question and answer time. Let us begin with Suheil Lahir. Dr. Lahir, welcome, and thank you for joining us for this webinar today.
Everyone. Thank you, Bill. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, just having a bit of problems controlling the screen, but I think I'm okay now. All right, so I will get started. And I decided to start out with this quote, which is one of my favorite quotes from Shakespeare. In nature, there's no blemish but the mind. None can be called deformed but the unkind. I really like this quote, and it happens to parallel a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, a hadith, which says that God does not look at your forms or your bodies. Rather, he looks at your hearts and your deeds. All right, so before speaking about Islam and disability specifically, I thought I would start out with some introductory material about Islam itself, because we may have attendees here who don't know much about the religion itself. Sorry, Eric, I'm having trouble with the slides. Okay, we're in the right place now. All right, so the word Islam is an Arabic word meaning submission. It is etymologically related to another Arabic word, salam, meaning peace. And the religion teaches its followers to seek peace through submission to Allah, which is the Arabic word for God, through submission to God, the creator of the universe. The Quran is the holy book of Islam. It is the central text. There is another source of Islamic teaching as well, which we'll get to in the next bullet point. But I wanted to say something about the Quran. We will be looking also at some Quranic quotations that have a bearing on Islam and disability. So the Quran is the central book of Islam, believed by Muslims to be God's words brought to the Prophet Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. If we wanted to sum up its central themes, we would have to mention monotheism, definitely, worshipping only the one true God, the necessity of worshipping only God, who is the creator and sustainer of all, and Allah, as I mentioned, is the Arabic word for God. Along with monotheism, there is also the very strong theme, reiterated over and over, of human accountability, that people will be judged by God after death. Thirdly, that God has communicated with humankind, here in the Quran and before in history. So Muslims believe that God sent various prophets or human messengers to convey a message from God across history, starting with Adam, going through various others who are familiar to those in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus is considered a prophet in Islam, and Muhammad then is the last in the series of divinely inspired prophets. Fourthly, judgment after death, heaven and hell. And fifthly, the Quran contains a framework of moral and ethical teachings. After the Quran, the other important source of Islamic teaching is the Hadith, sometimes referred to also as the Sunnah. This is essentially the sayings or the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. And the Prophet Muhammad lived 7th century of the Common Era in what is today Arabia. All right, so that's a brief overview of what Islamic beliefs and teachings are about. There are also practices such as prayer, charity, fasting, pilgrimage, along with various ethical teachings, as I mentioned. But Islam is the name of the religion, and it is a religion, not a culture. It accommodates different cultures. A Muslim is a person who believes in Islam, and there are an estimated 1.5 billion Muslims in the world today. Of that number, only about 15% are Arabs, in spite of the fact that Islam started in Arabia. In the United States, there are an estimated 3.3 million Muslims or more. There are a number of estimates and no precise statistics, but 3.3 or more million Muslims in the USA. American Muslims are racially diverse, including many white and black American converts, as well as immediate immigrants and descendants of immigrants from generations preceding. Many of the African slaves brought to America during the transatlantic slave trade were Muslim. Okay, so hopefully those two preceding slides should be useful as a kind of introduction to Islam and Muslims for those not too familiar with the two words and with the religion. Now I will proceed to address specifically the topic of Islam and disability. And I will start with some Quranic verses, passages in the Quran that have a bearing on disability. So probably the most prominent figure in the Quran that we need to mention that comes to mind if we're talking about this subject is the Prophet Moses, right? The Israelite prophet. And in the Quran, we have Pharaoh, right? The infamous Pharaoh, the notorious Pharaoh, essentially making fun of Moses, saying that, am I, meaning Pharaoh, not better than this one who is insignificant and hardly makes himself clear? Hardly makes himself clear. This is a reference to some type of a speech disability that the prophet Moses had. Similarly, in another verse, Moses himself makes reference to this disability, where he's praying, supplicating to God, my Lord, expand for me my breast, with assurance, it's a metaphor, of course, and ease for me my task, and untie the knot from my tongue, that they may understand my speech. And in yet another verse, Moses says, my chest is tight, and my tongue is not fluent, so send for Aaron. And it's the first phrase here that I wanted to highlight. My chest is tight, of course, could be understood, as some commentators of the Quran have done so. It could be understood as merely a metaphor for sadness, for grief, and so on. However, there is another interpretation that has been given as well. My chest is tight and my tongue is not fluent. This could be understood to mean that I have all of these thoughts and ideas in my heart, in my mind, but my tongue is not fluent because of my speech disability. I'm not able to effectively put my thoughts into words. And so send for Aaron, who is more eloquent of a speaker than me, so he can help me in my mission to Pharaoh. Another verse at the bottom of the slide, Surah 24, verse 61. So yeah, the Quran is divided into 114 surahs of varying lengths. So the first number in these references is the surah number. And the second number is the verse number. No blame is there upon the blind, nor any blame upon the lame, nor any blame upon the sick. There are a number of interpretations about this verse in the books of exegesis, the books of tafsir, various narrations mentioned concerning what might have been the circumstances in which this verse was revealed. One of these sets of narrations tells us that this verse was revealed in connection with people with various types of disabilities who felt uncomfortable associating with normal people, sitting with them, eating with them, and so on. And so according to this interpretation, the people with disabilities are being told that there is no blame upon you. You should feel free to interact with quote unquote normal people, people who are not disabled, without having any reservations about it, without feeling unequal. Proceed to the next slide. Yeah, this preceding verse actually is sometimes construed to mean something which, looking at the context, it probably doesn't directly refer to, but which nevertheless is a valid meaning, and which I have on the next slide. So there is no blame on the disabled in the senses in which we mentioned, but also in the sense that they are not to be blamed for their disability. So another central part of Islamic teaching is that God is fair, God is just. Every human being is born with a clean slate and is accountable only for their own beliefs and actions. So disability of whatever sort, physical, intellectual, disability is not a curse. It is not an indicator of God's anger or punishment. Rather, it is a test. God tests people in different ways, and disabilities can be a form of test. The next point, we mentioned that God is fair. Also in Islamic theology, Islamic teaching, God is good, and God is in charge. So what we sometimes see as bad, the believer has faith, contains good or wisdom in the bigger scheme of things. And worldly suffering can be a means for spiritual growth. There is a hadith here. Again, hadith is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, and the hadith and Quran are the two major, or the two central sources of Islamic teaching, but they have always been kept distinct and separate. So there is a hadith in which the Prophet Muhammad says, "Seek me among your weak, for you are granted sustenance on account of the weak among you." What does this mean? The way this hadith is typically explained by the commentators is that those who are weak, right, weak, sick, disabled, and so on, because of the suffering they are going through, they are likely to be closer to God, because suffering kind of impels people to think about God and to turn to God. So the Prophet Muhammad says, "Seek me among your weak, for you are granted sustenance on account of the weak among you." Okay. Turning to some of the implications of these Islamic beliefs for people with disabilities in general, and how the Muslim believer is supposed to approach such people. The first point I have up there is that everyone is considered responsible for what they have been blessed with. And as we find in the Christian Bible, from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. The same concept exists in Islamic teaching. So gratitude is extremely important in Islamic teachings, and it, theologically speaking, is also central. This is essentially the purpose for which Islam teaches that we are here, to realize that we need to be grateful to God. So Muslims are called upon to see, people are called upon to see, not necessarily with the eye, but with the heart, and understand God's signs in the universe. To be grateful to God for what we have, and part of gratitude is to use one's limbs and abilities to help others. Patience in the face of misfortune or suffering when it occurs, when it exists, and this applies, of course, to sickness, to disability, to natural calamities, and so on. There are also some specific narrations from the Prophet, some specific hadiths. One hadith tells us that one who is blind and bears a blindness patiently can expect to go to paradise because of the patience they have shown. Another hadith tells us there will be many weak and inconspicuous people in heaven. And the third important teaching I have up on the slide is respect and love for others, especially the less fortunate. We have a Quranic verse prohibiting people from ridiculing other people, because perhaps those who are being ridiculed are actually better than the ones ridiculing them. Do not insult one another, and do not call each other by offensive nicknames. Okay, so we mentioned Moses already as a prominent example, probably the most prominent example of someone from the Islamic tradition. And of course, Moses is also part of the Judeo-Christian tradition, but Moses is the most prominent figure when it comes to disability in the Quran. If we look at the Islamic tradition more broadly, there have been numerous other prominent individuals within the tradition who had some type of disability. Ibn Maktoum, Abdullah ibn Maktoum, was a companion of the Prophet Muhammad who was blind, one of the early believers, and he was the mu'azzin. Mu'azzin is the person who calls out, recites the call to prayer, which is called out 5 times every day. So it is a very important role. It is a very important religious role, and it is a very prominent and public role. And the Prophet Muhammad appointed a blind man to this role. He also left the same blind man, Ibn Maktoum, in charge of the city. So perhaps roughly parallel to what we might call the mayor today, someone in charge of the city. Prophet Muhammad left Ibn Maktoum in charge of the city 13 times when he himself had to be away. Ibn Auf, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, was another of the early believers who faced persecution for his believers. And he is one of those to whom the Prophet Muhammad gave glad tidings of paradise. But when we read his description, we find he had no front teeth. He was left-handed. Again, there are sometimes stigmas about left-handed people in many cultures. But here we have a man whom the Prophet of Islam himself testifies to his righteousness, who is left-handed and lame. Aban ibn Uthman, died 723 Common Era, is generally considered to be the first chronicler in Islamic history. He was hard of hearing. Ata ibn Abi Rabah, prominent Quranic scholar, was of African descent. He was black. He was also pug-nosed. He was an amputee, and he had an arm that was paralyzed. And yet he was probably the most prominent Quranic scholar of his time. This is 2 generations after the Prophet Muhammad. Wasil ibn Atta was a theologian, Mu'tazilite theologian, who had a speech disability. He basically had a lisp. He was unable to pronounce the letter R, but because of his skill with the language, he managed to deliver very, very eloquent sermons that did not use any words containing the letter R, which is pretty impressive. Qalun, died 835 Common Era, was an eminent Quran reciter. He is one of probably the 20 or so most famous Quran reciters from the first 2 centuries. He was hard of hearing, and amazingly it is said that in spite of his hardness of hearing, he could correct people in their Quranic recitation, correct his students merely by reading their lips. Okay. When I address Muslim audiences and sermons and so on, and remind them of their responsibilities to the disabled, I often mention these 3 points. If we look at the Quranic verses that have a bearing on disability and the hadiths on this topic and Islamic teachings and principles in general, it is pretty easy to see that these 3 consequences should follow. That we should give time to people with disabilities. A mentally disabled woman once asked to speak with the Prophet Muhammad, and he told her, all right, you select the place, any public place, I will sit with you, you speak to me for as long as you want to, as long as you need to. Secondly, we need to provide assistance. I already mentioned the hadith where the Prophet Muhammad says, seek me among your weak, right? Meaning I will be around them. I like to be around them. And one of the reasons for that is to help them. There are also other precedents in Islamic tradition. The prominent jurist Abu Hanifa, the eponymous founder of one of the Islamic schools of law, gave a ruling that the government, the state treasury, is responsible for providing for the needs of disabled people if their families are unable to. And one of the Muslim rulers, the Caliph Ma'mun, Abbasid Caliph, he set up a home, a kind of shelter for blind people and for women in Baghdad. And the third message I give to people is that we need to provide accessibility to people with disabilities, and not just accessibility, but we should be looking for integration. Why, from an Islamic theological perspective, should we be working for this? Because the Prophet Muhammad said, none of you has faith until he loves for his brother, and according to another version, for his neighbor, what he loves for himself. He also instructed the leaders of congregational prayer that they should not make the prayer too long, because among your congregation, there are people who are ill, people who are weak, and those with special circumstances. And he prohibited 2 people from conversing to the exclusion of a third. Right? So clearly, we are supposed to be including people. The Prophet himself appointed a disabled person, a blind man to a very important position in society. And I think I'm just about out of time. So I wanted to end with this hadith, which I think is a good note to end on, which kind of reiterates some of the points I've already made. So Islam is about recognizing God and worshiping God and then being a good person. And this hadith tells us that the gates of goodness are many. Glorifying and praising God, declaring his greatness and oneness, enjoining good, preventing wrong, removing something harmful from the road, helping the deaf to hear, guiding the blind, directing someone to allow them to fulfill their need, exerting your legs to run to answer the cry of one in distress, exerting your arms to lift something for someone weak. All of these are a charity you perform for yourself. In other words, we are benefiting ourselves even before the other person. We need to do it for our own benefit, as a responsibility to God, as part of the gratitude for what we have. Right, I think I'm maybe a couple of minutes over, so thank you for your patience, and I'll hand over, I think, to Joohi now for her portion.
Thank you, Suheil, and good afternoon, everyone, and a big thanks to the Collaborative on Faith and Disabilities for having us share this topic today. My name is Joohi Tahir, and I want to share a little bit about taking the theological aspect that you just heard about from Islam and now really looking at the practice and what some of us have been able to do in the Muslim community, specifically the efforts of the organization that I run, but along with that, just a little bit more about Muslims and disabilities in practice here. So with that, I'm going to essentially, when we think about disabilities, and these are perhaps very, very simple thoughts, but I think it's important just to reiterate here, in the lens of what we're talking about with Islam, it's important that we see the individual and not the disability. These people are no less Muslim and no less deserving in your communities. And I say that from the aspect of having the access to spirituality in our communities. We often know that it's good to help someone who has a different kind of ability or different needs, but addressing the individual's spiritual need is also something that we're going to be speaking about here. It's often stated in our faith that people with disabilities, some of them, will always remain in a very innocent state and therefore will not be held accountable, unlike typically developing humans. And what I mean by this is we're talking about people with cognitive disabilities, those who do not have the ability to decipher right from wrong, good versus bad. And so we're looking at people in a very different light here. Every person, it's our belief, on earth is tested in a certain way. And this may be a test from Allah, from God. That's another way to really think about the disability. Also, that each person has their own personalities, their temperaments, their strengths and abilities, and their own given potential. And it's really important here that, yes, this applies to everyone, but specifically in the community of people with disabilities. We're always looking at what the disability is, but we're really not looking at what the strengths and abilities are all about. And that's what we like to focus on. And overcoming the challenge of stigma, being seen as a punishment. And unfortunately, culturally, and it's not just something that I can say has been brought to my attention in the Muslim faith, but in other faiths also, at times it's, what did I do to deserve this? Am I a bad person? Why am I being tested this way? And really, talking about it and dispelling those stigmas. At the end of the day, back to Suheil's presentation, God is good. And we have to believe that there are reasons and messages and signs for us. I'm sharing now just a visual because I'm a very visual person. And oftentimes I present on the topic of disabilities, and you may not see very many Muslims with disabilities. And I think it's really important that we just kind of give ourselves a visual that, Allah made them all, and whether young, whether old, whether different ethnicities, we do come from a very diverse combination of people. And so it's always good to kind of put a picture out there in terms of visible as well as invisible disabilities. And these are some of the struggles we go through in our communities because people don't always know. They don't know we exist. They don't know where we are. They don't know what we look like. And so here you have them. I want to touch on kind of the movement of the onset of the inception of the disability organizations that we've seen here in the States. Back in, I believe, 2001, an organization by the name of Equally Able was founded, and it is still in existence today. Equally Able, I believe, is East Coast based, and primarily it deals with the empowerment and inclusion of people with disabilities. A large focus has been on people with mobility disabilities, and also they do a lot of work between the States and India specifically, is what I know. And, job training, providing equipment, oftentimes, in those countries where you won't have as many facilities and possibilities as there are here. And so that's Equally Able. Also on the scene, we have Global Deaf Muslim. Global Deaf Muslim was founded in 2005 by, I believe, a group of graduate students, also on the East Coast. And their entire purpose was to access Islamic information or information about their faith. And so a lot of times people who are either deaf or they are blind, as we know, will struggle in this area, because if you want to access a sermon, or as we call it, a khutbah on a Friday prayer, you would need to be in a mosque or a community where sign language is prevalent, and that is far and few. It's very rare. And so Global Deaf Muslim, I think, was created with that purpose, to provide access to that community and provide materials to that community and provide training. And I know they have a couple of chapters around the country. On that scene, back in 2014, we launched MUHSEN. MUHSEN stands for Muslims Understanding and Helping Special Education Needs. In my experience as a parent of a child with a disability, we did not have one umbrella organization for the Muslim community that existed that addressed on the ground what we as families and caregivers were dealing with in terms of the isolation of Muslims with disabilities. And as someone who worked in corporate America, sales and marketing for more than 20 years, I really felt that one part of our connection spiritually was missing, because our family, having a person with a disability, we were not able to access the community as well as we wanted to. We thought there was a lack of awareness. And so that's why MUHSEN was created. We strive to establish a more inclusive environment for our brothers and sisters of all disabilities. MUHSEN advocates, educates, trains, and implements programs and services nationwide, which will in turn go ahead and improve access to mosques and to special events and to community events. It's not just to the mosques, while kind of creating an environment of acceptance and inclusion. And it was really important that one organization tackle this. Equally Able was there, and as I said, the emphasis was a little bit more on the physical, the physical disabilities and the mobility disabilities, and a lot of work was being done overseas. Global Deaf Muslim, with a couple of chapters between, I believe, Illinois, the West Coast, and Minnesota, there were focusing only on people who were deaf. And so MUHSEN needed to come about in order to address kind of all the other disabilities. And so that's how it was kind of founded. We did a survey, and we update this survey every year. And these red pins that you see on the map represent clusters of families or individuals that have registered with MUHSEN. And what that shows us is that the people that are reaching out and they're taking a needs survey that we have on our website, they are identifying themselves as, this is where I live, this is the disability, either of my own or of a family member, and these are the supports and services I need. And so that's kind of what that map is showing. They have been statistics that have come out by the FYI org out of Michigan, and the Islamic Society of North America, quoting that there are a total of 600,000 Muslims living in America with disabilities, varying disabilities. This is a large number. And a lot of these people are unfortunately in hiding in the sense that they're not accessing their communities and not coming out for the support that they need. With that, we took our survey results a little bit further, and we wanted to ask, and I don't have this updated for 2018 yet, but it was for the year before. And by no surprise, a lot of what we saw, people reporting that they had a prevalence of autism in their families or Down syndrome in their families. There are so many to list, but a lot of these families with children were the ones that were speaking out. Although the survey did, surveyed people of all ages, the Muslim community in general in the United States tends to be a younger demographic. And so you had people definitely who are a lot younger accessing the survey and taking the survey. We asked what kind of supports were needed, and I know there are a lot of small numbers here, but the big hits are the top responses that I pulled out. People are looking for childcare. They're not looking for just childcare in their home, really specifically. They're looking for childcare at a mosque or at a community center or a program that they want to access. They want to be able to come to a Friday night talk at the mosque and be able to access and sit and listen and not be worried that no one is watching out for their child or that their child is going to be, disruptive in the program. They're looking for quiet rooms where a child with sensory processing issues can be comfortable in that space. They're looking for support groups as caregivers so they can speak to people who are like-minded. They're looking for access to the programs, the weekend school programs. Why can't their child go to Sunday school? And when I say accessibility, specifically that included adequate parking, accessible entrances, prayer areas, and an accessible bathroom and ablution area. When you enter a mosque, before the prayer, everyone is required to go through a washing ritual. Well, that's great unless you're in a wheelchair. And then we need to make sure that those areas are also conducive to people who need to access the area. So you'll see a little bit more about that and hear a little bit more about that. These are the supports they asked for. So disabilities affect us all. And how do they affect us? They obviously affect the individual who is living with the disability. But again, as part of perhaps call it the cultures that fall under the Muslim community, so many of us live with very close-knit families and larger families. So it impacts the family. And who else? Who is in that third box? Well, it impacts society and our community. There are always people missing, whether it's a parent, whether it's a sibling. The families who are missing from the community are missing because they need that help, they need that support. So whether it's respite care for adults, whether it's special services or accommodations to get these people into the mosques, we realized and found through our research that there were a lot of people out there who were not able to attend these events. This is my daughter. This is my second daughter. I have 3 daughters. Her name is Mehreen, and Mehreen is really the inspiration for the organization. Back, in 2014, when we launched and formed MUHSEN, I had spoken to a very prominent scholar in the U.S. His name is Sheikh Omar Suleiman, and he is based in Dallas. And he is actually my co-founder and the brainchild behind MUHSEN. We talked about how my daughter didn't have a place in the mosque, and as much as she wanted to, we had had some experiences where when I had taken her, if she had vocalized, Mehreen is on the autism spectrum and speaks very little. But at a younger age, she had quite a few vocalizations. She was extremely hyperactive. And so that was not very conducive to sitting and listening in a quiet way in a mosque to a program or a special talk or something that was going on. And I had not had very good experiences. And so I shared this with the scholar, with Sheikh Omar. And, you know, we started to talk about it and realized that an effort had to be made. And I go back to the saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that Mr. Suheil shared earlier: none of you has faith until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. So I asked around our community and said, don't you want, just like your family is here, don't you want other families to feel comfortable here? Don't we want everyone to feel that sense of community? And so Mehreen has taught us a lot that if we're patient and if we advocate, and if we advocate for good, a lot can change. And actually the word MUHSEN in Arabic, the meaning of the word is doer of good. And so with that, I want to share with you a short video. It's about 5 minutes, and then I'll go into sharing a few more programs before we close. But basically, it's in the words of families as to why we needed a movement like this in the Muslim community.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Omar Sulaiman. You know, this is truly a dream come true, just to be a part of a promo about MUHSEN after all these years of planning and getting it together and, you know, just envisioning, subhanAllah, what it would be like for the Muslim community to have an effort, an initiative that goes out there and re-mosques, you know, an often forgotten group of unmosqued individuals and unmosqued families, in fact, that have people in their, that have, you know, children, that have people in their families that have these special needs and that have these disabilities.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Arshi Ali Khan, and today I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my brother.
I want to take this time to talk to you about my daughter, Serena, who is mashallah 6.5 now. And she's a bright, loving, kind, fun child who has this great toothless smile right now. She lost her tooth, and she also has cerebral palsy.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Tahir, and I'm 15 years old. And I have a sister named Mehreen, and she's great at basketball. She's a whiz at the computers. She loves to eat, and she has autism spectrum disorder.
When I was 19 years old, my brother was diagnosed with a mental illness, an invisible disability. At the time, there was no community support or religious outlets that we could turn to for help. So instead of being supported, we felt alienated and shamed.
There are so many families that are affected by this in our community, and we just don't see them, subhanAllah, because they're buried away while we're enjoying our khutbahs and we're enjoying our halaqas and we're enjoying all the great activities in the masjid. These families have been completely barred from the masjid, and when they set foot in the masjid, it's the most uncomfortable feeling in the world. So for many families, we're not just talking about those that have needs and disabilities, many families, the masjid has become a place to resent, because when they walk in there, all they get are the dirty looks, all they get are the, you know, go home sentiments, rather than this is your home, because the masjid is the home of every believer, as the Prophet ﷺ said.
We just need a little extra help. We need a little extra support. We need a little understanding. But inshallah, we can get there. There's no reason not to. It's not asking for a lot. It's just asking for a little bit of acceptance, a little bit of sensitivity. And I think an organization like MUHSEN is the perfect vehicle to do that, inshallah.
I pray for the success of MUHSEN, because had there been an organization that was around for us to connect to, that provided awareness, acceptance, and guidance, perhaps my brother wouldn't have been left alone. Perhaps my mom wouldn't have put herself to bed crying day in and day out. Perhaps families like ours would have had a place to go and people to support them through it.
What helps me get through everything when we're going through a struggle with Mehreen is that thinking that Mehreen is an angel. And if we hold on to a sinless angel like Mehreen, inshallah, she will help us on the day of judgment, and she will take us to Jannah, inshallah. and I would like other people to feel the same way.
Inshallah ta'ala, through this, through MUHSEN, we can begin to show ihsan to them, and hopefully we can make the masjid more comfortable for them, and they can make our day of judgment more comfortable for us by testifying on our behalf that we truly did ease the way for them.
One of the things that I like to think is when people see us outside as a family, don't look away from us and ignore us. Even a smile is charity. Smile at us. There's a lot of families like us out there. We all need to support each other. And the families who are not like us need to step up and help us out. I have been blessed and honored to develop and work for the Ummah Center, a nonprofit dedicated to empowering the lives of the underserved, the alienated, the disenfranchised, the poor. We provide education empowerment programs and basic need programs. And with every person that I have fed, educated, clothed, and served, I pray deep down that there is someone out there doing the same for my brother.
So with that, what I wanted to share was that last woman that was speaking about her brother. He actually had mental illness and was so stigmatized. His family was, told, don't bring him anywhere, don't bring him out publicly. He actually ended up leaving home, and they believe he went homeless. He never returned to the family. To this day, they don't actually know where he is, whether he is even alive. So these are real life stories, and the reason for my sharing them is to show the repercussion of not having that support in the community. And in any case, from that, MUHSEN was born. And I just want to touch briefly on the programs. We go out and we do awareness events throughout the communities across the country. We actually have support groups where we have professional licensed social workers, family therapists, every month putting together support groups in different communities where caregivers can come out if they're comfortable coming to the mosque and doing it there. If not, we have other locations we hold them at. And this has been wildly popular, and people are coming out in droves. We have specialized weekend school classes, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We do provide Braille Qurans for people who are blind. We provide trained respite care workers to go out and give families a break. Where, if I want to go somewhere and perhaps it doesn't work for my loved one with a disability, someone can come into my home and take care of that person. The way the government funding is set up, not everyone has access to some of these programs through the government. So we don't try to replicate that. We just try to supplement. We provide training for the youth to, share how they can be more sensitive towards people with disabilities in the community. They become some of our best volunteers. We have sign language services. Oftentimes Global Deaf Muslim reaches out to us and they ask us to provide sign language for, sermons, for conferences, for classes that are being taught. We have an entire service provider directory of people in the community by state on our website. We also have matrimonial service for people with disabilities in the Muslim community who are looking to get married. So that is also something that we had been asked for. And down the road, for day programs and for residential facilities, that's also kind of on our radar. A lot of these programs are all part of, the MUHSEN portfolio of things that we have done. Our mosque certification program is one of our, basically our landmark programs. We provide a type of a checklist per se, and it's a checklist of things that a mosque or a community needs to have in order to be considered MUHSEN certified. It's a guideline, and that's exactly what these communities have been looking for. They're willing to help to make their communities more welcoming. They just don't know how. So right now, currently, we have 31 mosques certified across the country. We've even launched our efforts in the UK, where there's quite a bit of demand, and really focusing in on letting the mosque know. And anyone who wants to see the details can visit muhsen.org, and you can look at the program, you know, outlining some of the things that the community would need in order to become certified. And the weekend school program, it's who doesn't want to go to Sunday school? Every parent's dream is that their child gets to go to some sort of a religious class, maybe once a week. Well, kids with disabilities deserve that too. And they deserve to be within the community. So right now we have 11 programs running and in various parts of the country. And we've taken a look at these families who want their children to learn a little bit about their faith. And we go at the child's pace, and this is completely volunteer run. So the curriculum has been adapted and created by MUHSEN for MUHSEN programs, and it's really been wildly successful, where it's a one-to-one ratio of a staff member to a child, a very small class size with, you know, different types of materials that the children can work with, and general concepts. Who is God? You know, a nightly prayer that they can learn. But what is so beautiful about this program is it's often housed within the regular weekend school. So if there's a Sunday school already running in the community, MUHSEN just takes a class and says, we'd like to run our program in one of the classes, and then we start letting people know and recruit students. And in every community, they have inclusion also. So it's not that we are just isolating these children in the MUHSEN classroom, but there's also an opportunity to, you know, be a part of the community, join in with you know, other events and things that are going on with the community at large. We partake in events, national conventions across the country. There'll be speed pass lines, there'll be special events, there'll be special talks. As I mentioned earlier, sign language and American Sign Language for all the, you know, sessions that people want to attend at these conventions. We also recently, in the past 2 years now in a row, we have taken an entire group to Saudi Arabia for the mini pilgrimage, and provided one-on-one support for these individuals who've wanted to go to the most blessed place on earth for Muslims. And why not? We're providing access to mosques at home. Why not to these wonderful places? And people of all various disabilities around the country have signed up and have attended with us. And advocacy work. We'll show up, Team MUHSEN will be at the autism walks, at the Down syndrome walks. 2 years in a row, we were named in Chicago the largest team with 420 walkers at the Autism Speaks Walk. It was a really great event. This is a universal cause, doesn't matter what your faith is, and we were out there showing our support. And it's all about inclusion. And at the end of the day, the goal is to integrate these families back into the mosque, back into the community, and show them that we, you know, as Muslims, they belong. And that goes without saying. And our volunteers, we have over 150 volunteers around the country. MUHSEN is run on a very slim organization of 4 staff members on payroll. The rest of our crew, they're all volunteers, and they're very compassionate, beautiful people who do this work. So with that, I end, and I hope you all learned something about what's being done with disability in our communities, and I'll hand it back over to you, Bill.
There about, do you have people with disabilities who are in MUHSEN's leadership, or is it mostly family members?
On the board, we do have people with disabilities. We have someone who has muscular dystrophy, actually, is one of our board members. Yes.
Great. And there's a question about the sign language service you do. Was that English or Arabic?
The most demand we get is for American Sign Language, so it's English. Although I must point out that the Braille Quran, we can make it available to people in Arabic Braille as well as English Braille, but English is far more popular.
And you see that maybe the question, how can non-Muslims support the work of MUHSEN in their own communities?
Well, first of all, thank you. And yes, if you visit our website, you can get in touch. You can kind of see where our events are taking place. You can volunteer. You can support financially. We're open to all of that. So we really appreciate it. And maybe letting the Muslim community know that MUHSEN exists and maybe they haven't heard of us.
So for people who would like to follow up with you, it'd be through the website and through your email. And
Absolutely. Yes, it's muhsen.org.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Thanks so much. One quick other question. There was an earlier question, Suheil, about what does it mean? Maybe you saw this to bear blindness patiently.
Yes. So the understanding is that bearing it patiently, bearing blindness or any misfortune patiently would involve making the best of the situation that you're in, and especially not complaining about God, objecting to why God has put one in this situation.
Okay. All right, that could be a beginning of another interesting discussion about the conversations we all have with God in different ways, or with Allah. Let me thank you, both of you, for a terrific webinar and for your time and presence with us today. We need to close this up, but we will, again, you can be in touch with either one of our speakers. They're very approachable, and it's been a great pleasure of mine to work along with them in some of the last few years. Just a couple of notes about upcoming webinars. We're going to do them monthly, either on the 3rd or the 4th Wednesdays of the month. It varies some this year because of some of the scheduling, but next February, there were people who asked about what's the research about around health and spirituality these days, and what are the implications, which there's a lot of that. What are the implications about that for people with disabilities and their families? And then in March, we're moving to the Roman Catholic community and including students with disabilities in Roman Catholic schools. Forward, Eric. And also, if you're some of you connected to the collaborative on the same website as the collaborative, there's information about the Summer Institute on Theology and Disability that will be in Holland, Michigan this year in May. Also, if you go to that part of the website, the program is not up yet, it's being finalized, and the registration site will be up around March 1st. But if you go there, you'll see previous institutes, and in the 2013, the 2017, and the 2018, there are plenary videos, plenary speakers who were talking about Islam and disability. And so 2013, 17, and 18, there's some great presentations there. One of them is by Suheil in 2017, and this last year, Dilshad Ali, who writes a blog called Musima Next Door, is mom of a child on the autism spectrum, or a young adult on the autism spectrum. He's a terrific writer, and it's a great blog site. So think about the Summer Institute if you'd like to come join us in Holland, Michigan in May. And thank you for being with us. Take a look at the faithanddisability.org website. Look around at some of the projects we've been involved with. We're on the cusp, we hope, of being able to kind of open up a volunteer membership for organizations besides university centers of excellence and individuals and others as a place to connect and to share resources together. With special thanks to Eric Carter and to Courtney Taylor for being the technological whizzes behind this, and for the help of Tennessee Captioning today. It's the first time we've been able to do a captioning for a webinar, and we're very grateful to them. Have a good day all, and thank you for being with us.